When my son told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving because my presence made his wife's family uncomfortable, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply drove home in the dark, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and sat down at my desk with my reading glasses and my laptop. The automatic payment for his car loan was scheduled for the following morning. I canceled it before midnight. 4 days later, my phone showed 42 missed calls. I let it ring to 43. Before I tell you the rest of this story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been the one holding everyone else up while they complained about the wait, hit like and subscribe. You'll want to hear how this ends. My name is Ray, and I am 67 years old. I drove a 2009 Chevy Silverado with 140,000 miles on it. I wore flannel shirts and work boots to the grocery store. I ate dinner alone most nights at a diner called Patsy's, where the coffee came in a thick ceramic mug and nobody asked me about my portfolio. My son had been embarrassed by that truck for years. He called it a liability. He said it gave people the wrong impression. I never told him what the right impression actually was. I had spent 31 years as an aerospace engineer, not the kind who attended conferences and gave speeches. The kind who sat in a basement office and solved problems nobody else could solve. In 2009, a patent I filed for a fuel optimization system in commercial aircraft was licensed to 4 major manufacturers. The royalty checks arrived quarterly, and they were not small. I owned 3 commercial properties outright in a city I had moved away from 15 years ago, managed remotely by a firm I trusted completely. I lived in a modest ranch house in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, because I liked the quiet and because I had no one to impress. My son Kyle did not know any of this. He knew I had a pension. He knew I owned my house. He thought I was comfortable in the way older men are comfortable, just enough. Nothing extra. He knew that because I never corrected him. I found that people treat you differently when they think you have limited resources. Some treat you with pity. Others treat you with contempt. Kyle had settled somewhere in between. He was 34, worked in advertising sales, and had a gift for spending money that hadn't fully arrived yet. 3 years ago, I co-signed a loan for his car because he said his credit was transitional. I didn't just co-sign. I quietly covered the payment every month because I knew what happened when payments got missed, and I didn't want his credit destroyed before it ever got started. I covered his and my daughter-in-law Amber's health insurance because his employer's plan had a $2,000 monthly gap that was quietly swallowing them whole. I had never asked for anything in return, except a seat at the table. Amber's family was from Scottsdale. Her father, Gerald, was the kind of man who wore a polo shirt to every occasion and talked about real estate he didn't own. Her mother, Diane, collected opinions the way other people collect credit card debt freely and without limit. Her younger brother Derek had showed up in their lives about 18 months ago after what Amber described as a business relocation. I later found out it was a repossession and an eviction, in that order. Derek had the easy confidence of someone who had never faced a consequence that stuck. He smiled wide, shook hands hard, and never once asked how you were doing unless he needed something. The first time I met him, at Kyle and Amber's housewarming, he spent 20 minutes telling me about a real estate investment opportunity in Tennessee. I smiled and told him I'd think about it. I had no intention of thinking about it. The call came on a Monday evening in November. Kyle's voice was careful, rehearsed, the way it always got when Amber had written his talking points. "Dad, so about Thanksgiving this year. We've been talking, and Amber's parents are flying in, and Derek and Stacy are staying with us for the week, and we just think it's going to be a full house. It might be better if you came by after, maybe the weekend after, when things settle down." I was sitting in my driveway when he called. I had just come from Patsy's. I had a piece of apple pie and a takeout box on the passenger seat. I looked out the windshield at the bare November trees in front of my house. "I see," I said. "It's not about you, Dad. It's just you know how Amber gets when too many personalities are in one space. It can be a lot. You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that I had paid for Kyle's car for 36 months and wasn't invited to sit across a table from him on the one holiday built around gratitude. I understood that Derek, a man who had arrived with 2 suitcases and what I suspected were considerable legal problems, had a seat at my son's table, and I did not. "Enjoy the holiday, son," I said. "Tell Amber I said hello." "Are you okay, Dad? You're not upset, are you?" "Not at all," I said. "I'm making adjustments." I went inside, ate the pie at my kitchen counter, and finished the bourbon. Then I opened my laptop. The car payment of $612 was scheduled for the next morning. I canceled it. Then I pulled up the health insurance portal and suspended the monthly premium payment for their shared plan. $840 a month I had been routing through an account. Kyle didn't know I controlled. Then I called my attorney. Thomas Whitfield had been my personal attorney for 22 years. He was 70, sharp as a surgical instrument, and deeply amused by human foolishness. He answered on the second ring because he always answered on the second ring, regardless of the hour. "Ray," he said, "you sound like a man who just made a decision." "Activate the Harrison file," I said. A pause. The scratch of a pen on a notepad. "You sure? That document has been sitting for 3 years. "I'm sure, Thomas." "And pull together the full accounting. Every payment, every premium, every cosign. I want the total with interest at 4% annually." "I'll have it Monday," he said. "Ray, how bad is it?" I told him about the phone call, about Derek at the table, about the phrase, "too many personalities." Another pause. Then, "I'll have it ready Sunday night." I hung up, washed my glass, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. I had a dog named Sergeant. He was a 10-year-old beagle with a bad hip and a perfect temperament, and he slept across the foot of my bed every night. Amber had spent 3 years suggesting I rehome him before visits because she said she could smell him from the driveway. I brought him to every visit anyway. He was family, the actual kind. Thanksgiving came and went. I drove to Patsy's. I had the turkey plate and a slice of pecan pie, and I tipped 40% because the waitress, a woman named Carol, was working a holiday and deserved it. I was back home by 7. I watched football and fell asleep in my recliner with Sergeant on my lap. It was, genuinely, one of the better Thanksgivings I'd had in years. The first call came on December 1st. Kyle's voice had lost all its careful rehearsal. "Dad, the car payment bounced. The dealership is sending a late notice." "What happened to the automatic payment?" I was reading the paper at the kitchen table. I set it down and folded it neatly. "I canceled it, son." Silence. Why? What do you mean you canceled it?" "I mean I stopped the transfer. The payment isn't coming." "Dad," his voice climbed an octave, "that's a $600 payment. I don't have $600 sitting around right now. I've got Derek and Stacy staying with us, and we had Thanksgiving for 7 people, and the credit card is all ready." "Kyle," I said calmly, "you're a 34-year-old man with a salaried job. You should have $600 sitting around. That's not a luxury. That's basic financial management. You've been paying it for 3 years. You said you would help us while I got established." "I said I would help," I agreed. "I didn't say for how long, and I didn't say under any circumstances. You established something last month, son. You established that I'm not part of your family when it's inconvenient, so I'm acting accordingly." "This is about Thanksgiving?" He sounded genuinely incredulous. "Are you serious? You're withholding money because of one dinner?" "I'm not withholding anything. It was never your money to begin with. I'm simply stopping a voluntary contribution." I picked the newspaper back up. "You'll also want to check your health insurance. The premium didn't go through this month either. You have a 30-day grace period before the policy lapses." I heard him inhale sharply. Then, in the background, Amber's voice, low and urgent, asking what was happening. "Fix this, Dad," Kyle said. The guilt was gone. The defensiveness had moved in. "Merry Christmas, son," I said. "Let me know how Sergeant's doing." I hung up. The calls came in waves over the following 2 weeks. Kyle. Amber once, which surprised me. She rarely called me directly. Gerald, her father, left a voicemail that was so dignified in its condescension, I almost admired it. He told me that what I was doing was ungentlemanly, and that a man of my generation should understand the obligation of family support. I listened to it twice, and then deleted it. I spent those 2 weeks exactly as I pleased. I took Sergeant to the dog park every morning. I drove 3 hours to visit an old colleague from my engineering days who had been asking me to come for months. I ate well, slept well, and did not check my phone after 8 in the evening. On December 15th, Thomas called. "The accounting is ready," he said. 38 months of car payments, $23,017. 38 months of health insurance premiums, $31,920. Total principal, not including interest at 4% annually compounded, is $54,937 with interest. What's the number, Thomas? $61,214. The note is enforceable. Kyle signed it at the kitchen table when you started the payments. You told him it was paperwork for the cosign. He didn't read it. I remembered that afternoon. Kyle had been excited about the car. He'd signed 4 pages of documents without looking at a single one. I hadn't hidden anything. The document was clearly titled. He simply hadn't read it. "Activate Clause 9, I said. "Demand letter. Give him 30 days. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "This will end the relationship, Ray. At least for a while." The relationship ended in a Scottsdale Polo Shirts dining room on Thanksgiving, I said. "I'm just filing the paperwork." 2 days before Christmas, I drove past Kyle and Amber's house. Not to stop, just to see. The driveway held 3 cars, Kyle's, a rental I didn't recognize, and a large black SUV that I later confirmed belonged to Derek. The lights in the windows were warm and yellow. There was a wreath on the door that I had given them 2 years ago as a housewarming gift. Somebody had strung new lights along the gutters. The house looked festive and full. I thought about the quarterly royalty check that had landed in my account 4 days prior. I thought about the 3 commercial properties generating rent checks every month while I drove a truck with rust on the rear wheel wells. I thought about Sargent asleep in the passenger seat next to me, his gray muzzle resting on the center console. I thought about the fact that there was no seat at that warm, lit table for either of us. I put the truck in drive and went home. The demand letter arrived at Kyle's door on December 26th. Thomas had it hand-delivered by a process server, which I had specifically requested. Not for cruelty, for documentation. Kyle called me 11 times in 45 minutes. I let them go to voicemail. When I finally answered the 12th, he was crying. Not dramatically. The quiet, choked kind of crying that means something has actually broken through. "Dad, what is this? $61,000? You want me to pay you $61,000? You signed an agreement, son. I have your signature on every page. I didn't read it. That's not my problem. It's a foundational habit you might want to develop. Dad, please," his voice cracked. "I don't have $61,000. I don't even have $600. Derek borrowed money from us for the holidays. He said he'd pay us back in January. And now this." He stopped himself. I sat up straight. "Derek borrowed money from you?" I said. "He needed it for a deposit on a deal he's working. He said it was a sure thing. It always is with Derek." He said the last part with a bitterness I hadn't heard from him before. "How much?" A pause. $12,000, Amber insisted. "He's her brother." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "I see," I said. "Dad, can we please just talk? Can you come over? I need to sit down with you and figure this out. I don't know what to do." "I'll come over New Year's Day," I said. "That gives you time to think about what you want to say." "What about Christmas?" "You have Derek," I said, "and Gerald and Diane, and Stacy. It sounds like a full house." I hung up and called a man named Pete Dillard. Pete had been a fraud investigator with the SEC for 20 years before going private. He was 62, meticulous, and owed me a favor from a contract dispute I had quietly helped him resolve 4 years ago. "Pete," I said, "I need you to look into someone. His name is Derek, and he's been operating out of my son's address in Columbus. He's pitching real estate investments in Tennessee. I want to know what's behind it. How fast?" "Before New Year's," I said. Pete called me back on December 29th. What he told me was not entirely surprising, but the scale of it was. Derek had been operating a pooled investment scheme for 14 months, soliciting funds from at least 32 individuals across 4 states under the name of a company that was registered in Tennessee but held no actual assets. The Tennessee Department of Financial Institutions had opened a preliminary inquiry 6 weeks ago. An attorney representing 4 of his investors had filed a civil complaint in October. Derek had changed his registered address twice in the past year. His current listed address, the one on official documents, was Kyle and Amber's house on Brentwood Drive. Derek was not visiting for the holidays. He was using my son's address as a shield. I thought about Amber insisting on the $12,000 loan. I thought about whether she knew. I didn't want to think about whether she knew. I showed up on New Year's Day with Sargent on a leash and Pete Dillard's preliminary report in a manila folder under my arm. Kyle met me at the door. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, unshaved, hollowed out, the kind of tired that goes beyond physical. He opened the door wide and stepped back. The house was quieter than I expected. Gerald and Diane were gone. Derek and Stacy were in the living room. Derek was on his phone, his feet on the coffee table I had helped Kyle move into the house 3 years ago. He looked up at me, then at Sargent, with the mild irritation of a man whose relaxation has been interrupted. "Ray," he said. "Not hello, not Happy New Year, just my name, like an acknowledgement of an inconvenience." I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at Kyle. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" I said. The 3 of us. We sat in the kitchen. Amber was pale, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, not drinking from it. Kyle sat across from me, leaning forward on his elbows. I set the manila folder on the table but didn't open it yet. "I want to understand something first," I said. "The $12,000. Amber, did you know where it was going?" She flinched. A small, guilty flinch. "He said it was an investment," she said quietly. "He said we'd get 20 back by spring. Did you research the investment?" She looked at the table. "He's your brother," I said. Not harshly, just stating a fact. "I understand, but I need to know whether you understood what he was doing with other people's money." "I didn't know about the others," she said. Her voice was small. I believed her. I wasn't certain I should have, but I did. I opened the folder and set Pete's report between them. Kyle picked it up. His face changed as he read, not dramatically, not with the theatrical collapse of someone performing shock. It was the slow, sickening recognition of a man realizing he has been standing on a surface that was never solid. "He's using our address," Kyle said. "He has been for at least 4 months, I said. Kyle set the papers down. He turned and looked through the kitchen doorway toward the living room where Derek sat with his feet still on the coffee table. "Get out," Kyle said. His voice was quiet, which made it worse. Derek lowered his phone. "Excuse me? Get your feet off my table," Kyle said. "Get your stuff out of my guest room and get out of my house today." Derek looked at Amber. Amber looked at the table. "Amber, tell your husband." "He's right," Amber said. Her voice was almost inaudible. "You need to go, Derek." What followed was ugly in the way these things always are. The raised voice, the accusations of betrayal, the theatrical performance of wounded innocence from a man who had never been innocent a day in his adult life. Stacy cried. Derek slammed a door. I sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee Kyle had made and didn't say a single word. Sargent lay on my foot and watched the hallway. They were gone within the hour. When the door shut behind them, the house went very quiet. Kyle came back to the kitchen and sat down across from me. He looked at the manila folder. He looked at me. "What did they do to your address specifically?" he asked. "What's the exposure?" "Potentially substantial," I said. "You'll need your own attorney." "Not Thomas. Thomas represents me. You need someone independent." "I can't afford an attorney, Dad. I can't afford." He stopped, pressed his fingers into his eyes. "I can't afford anything right now." "I know," I said. "Is the demand note real? All 61,000 of it?" "Every cent." He was quiet for a long time. Sargent's tail moved slowly back and forth under the table. "I'm sorry about Thanksgiving," Kyle said finally. Not as a negotiating tactic, not as a preface to an ask. Just a flat, exhausted statement. Amber wanted her family together and I let her manage me instead of standing up for what was right. I've been doing that for 3 years, and I kept telling myself it was compromise. But it wasn't. It was cowardice. I looked at my son. He was thinner than he'd been 6 months ago. There were lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. His hands on the table were still. which was new. He'd always been a hand talker, animated and restless. The stillness meant something had settled. "There's something I haven't told you," I said. I told him about the patents, about the royalties, about the 3 commercial properties, about the net worth that bore no resemblance to the man in the flannel shirt and the rusted Silverado. I watched his face carefully. He didn't look greedy. That was the first thing I looked for, and it wasn't there. He looked confused, then almost wounded, and then something I hadn't expected, ashamed. "I've spent 3 years treating you like you needed us," he said. "Like we were doing you a favor by including you." "You were," I said. "I needed my son. The money is irrelevant to that. But Amber's parents, Gerald has been performing success for so long he can't find the man underneath it," I said. "That's not a family you want to imitate, son. That's a warning." He put his head in his hands, not crying, just thinking. After a long silence, he looked up. "What happens now? With the note? Are we going to court?" "That depends on you," I said. "I didn't file that note to take money from you. I don't need the money. I filed it to make you understand that nothing in life is without cost or consequence. Not even your father's patience. So what do you want?" I had thought carefully about this. I had sat with it through December, turning it over the way you turn over a problem with a lot of moving parts, looking for the solution that serves the actual goal rather than the emotional one. "I want you to go see Thomas," I said. "Not to negotiate. Just to sit down and read every document you've ever signed with my name on it. All of it. I want you to understand the full picture of what I've been carrying for you, not because you owe me, but because a man should know what's holding him up." Kyle nodded. "And then I want you to start paying your own car payment and your own insurance, even if it means cutting other things. Not because $61,000 will change my life, it won't, but because the practice of paying your own bills changes you. It changed me." "Okay," he said quietly. "And I want to come to Easter," I said. "And Sergeant comes too." He almost smiled at that. It was small and crooked and the most honest expression I'd seen on his face in years. "Sergeant can absolutely come to Easter," he said. I stayed for another hour. We talked about things we hadn't talked about in years, the engineering career I'd actually had, the patents he'd never known about, the early years of his mother's illness, when I had worked 60-hour weeks and still come home and made dinner because she needed to see normal. He listened in a way he hadn't since he was 12 years old. When I stood up to leave, he walked me to the door. On the front step, he hugged me. Not the quick, obligatory hug of a son who has been reminded by his wife to be affectionate. A real one. The kind you only get when someone has finally stopped performing and started feeling. "I'm going to fix this, Dad," he said. "I know," I said. And I meant it. Derek's legal situation unraveled through January and February with the slow, grinding momentum of a system that may be slow but rarely forgets. The Tennessee inquiry expanded. 2 more civil complaints were filed. His attorney, a man he apparently found through a referral from Gerald which explained the quality of the counsel, managed to delay an indictment but not prevent it. By March, Derek had been formally charged with securities fraud and wire fraud in 2 states. Stacy filed for legal separation a week later. Amber called me on a Tuesday evening, and when she started to explain why she was calling, her voice broke almost immediately. I listened. I didn't offer solutions. Sometimes that's the only thing you can offer. She asked me once, quietly, whether I thought she had known what Derek was. I told her I thought she had loved her brother and chosen not to look too carefully at what she was seeing. I told her that wasn't malice. It was something more ordinary than malice, and more forgivable. She was quiet for a moment. "You paid for our insurance for 3 years, she said. "I didn't even know." "No," I said. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I didn't want gratitude," I said. "I wanted connection. They aren't the same thing." By April, Kyle had set up automatic payments for his own car loan and had enrolled in a new insurance plan, a simpler one, with a higher deductible, that he paid himself. He told me about it on the phone with a kind of restrained pride that I recognized from when he was 8 years old and had finished a difficult book. Thomas had met with him twice. Kyle had read every document. On his second visit, Thomas told me afterward, Kyle had sat for a long time with the accounting statement, the full 61,000, and then asked Thomas what the right thing to do was. Thomas, who is a lawyer and not accustomed to being asked about right things, told him that was a conversation for his father. Kyle called me that evening. "I know you said you don't need the money," he said, "but I want to pay it back. Not all at once. It'll take years. But I want to." "Why?" I asked. A pause. "Because I want to be the kind of man who pays what he owes," he said, "even when nobody can force him to." I told him to work out a payment structure with Thomas. Small monthly amounts. Nothing that strained him. The money was genuinely not the point, but he was right about what the practice was worth. Easter came on a Sunday that felt like the first real day of spring. I drove my truck to their house with Sargent on the passenger seat and a bottle of good bourbon in a paper bag. Amber opened the door. She looked different, less curated, less performed. She crouched down immediately and let Sargent sniff her hand before scratching behind his ears. He approved. Sargent's opinion has never been wrong. Kyle was in the kitchen, actually cooking. He'd found a recipe online, and there were 3 pots on the stove and flour on his shirt, and the kitchen smelled exactly right. I sat at the counter and talked to him while he cooked, and it felt, for the first time in a very long time, like visiting family rather than attending an obligation. Gerald and Diane were not there. Amber had told them the timing didn't work this year. She told me this without fanfare, just a simple statement, and moved on. We ate at the dining table. Sargent sat between my chair and the wall and accepted small pieces of roast chicken with great dignity. We talked about Kyle's job and Amber's work and a trip they were thinking about taking. We talked about nothing important and everything real. At one point, Kyle made a joke that was actually funny, and I laughed and Amber laughed, and for a moment the house felt very full despite only having 3 people and a beagle in it. When I stood to leave, Kyle walked me to the truck. The April evening was cool and the neighborhood was quiet. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the Silverado. "I keep thinking I should talk you into a newer truck," he said. "You keep saying that?" I said. "And you keep not listening. That's the family tradition," I said. He laughed. "A real one. Dad," he said, "I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for Thanksgiving. For 3 years of letting Amber's family make me think that taking your support was the same as deserving it. For letting myself become someone you had to protect yourself from." I looked at my son in the evening light. He was 34 years old, and he had the hands of a man learning to carry his own weight and the eyes of someone finally interested in where he was going. "You figured it out," I said. "Some people never do." "You made sure I'd have to," he said. "That's what fathers are for," I said. "The good ones, anyway." I shook his hand, which had become our thing, a handshake between 2 men, which carries more weight than 100 speeches. Then I got in the truck. Sargent circled twice on the seat and settled. I backed out of the driveway and rolled down the window. "Sunday, 2 weeks from now," I called out. "Patsy's Diner, 11 o'clock. My treat. Bring Amber." He raised a hand in the cool air. I drove home through the quiet streets with the radio off and the window cracked, and Sargent asleep against my thigh. The royalty check from the 3rd quarter would come in June. The commercial properties were 94% occupied, and the numbers were clean. I had a trip to Iceland planned for September, something I had been meaning to do for 15 years. None of it felt urgent or important in the way it might have once. What felt important was the handshake, the kitchen with the flour on the shirt, the beagle eating chicken under the table. I had spent a decade confusing generosity with love. I gave money because it was easier than presents, and I accepted distance because I told myself it was maturity. It wasn't. It was the same avoidance dressed in a better suit. The hardest thing I ever did wasn't cancel a payment or call a lawyer or sit in a meeting room while a scheme collapsed. The hardest thing I ever did was decide that I was worth showing up for, and then actually show up, without writing a check first, without making it easy. Just walking through the door and taking up space and refusing to be managed out of the room. My name is Ray. I am 67 years old. I drive a truck with 140,000 miles on it, and I have never once been embarrassed by it. My dog is named Sargent, and he has better instincts about people than most attorneys I know. My son is learning to be a man, which means he's learning to be wrong and stay in the room anyway. If you've ever been the one quietly holding a family together while they pretended they didn't need you, you know exactly what this story costs. And you know exactly what it's worth. Hit like if you've been there. Subscribe if you want to hear more. And leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And tell me what it was that finally made you stop paying for something that should have been free.